Hi all, Randy Green here, and welcome to another podcast. It is September 1st today, and we had a massive CME from the sun yesterday, which they say, quote unquote, will hit us later today, but our magnetic field is already ringing, and it feels very unpleasant. It's stormy weather, which I have seen more than often that follows the CMEs when they hit our magnetic field. And this is not what science tells you. This is my personal observation. Of course, science will say I'm speculating and making this up and it's fantasy because that's not what the science tells us. But my raw experience, and it's not just today, it's multiple times. In a way, I should keep data or write it down, but I don't need to. I don't need to prove this. I'm just stating. We had a massive CME yesterday. It causes G3 flares that creates aurora, and that's what science know. But I'm saying that those of us who are sensitive, we can feel how the magnetic field literally is ringing. And the amount of energy that came from the sun yesterday was not the good stuff. It was the void energies that came instead. So our entire magnetic field around the planet is now ringing with the void energies which are disrupting the magnetic field into certain spots. It's not going to lead to big catastrophes because this is a very large system. But it's over the course of time, in 1,000 years, then it matters because this is about things that are building up. It's not about the single events. It's about the line of events, the succession of events that eventually will reach a momentum that then will begin to create some pretty severe changes in our planetary makeup, some 100 to 500 years into the future. So you could say, what is that to do with me? And you're absolutely right. Probably not much. But it does play in our energy work, especially for those who are bound to be reborn. And no, I'm not trying to drum up some fear state here. I am just stating what I know and sharing it. And of course, I could be wrong. Just always pay attention to that. Whoever come out with ideas of reality, it's always through the lenses of what we know and our personal stand on things and our individual capacities and where we are in the realms of understanding how complex our information systems are, how complex our levels of understandings are, and how much we are either using information based upon sciences or information based upon what's being quote unquote channeled from different entities, or what we are perceiving by our own merits due to our expanded awareness. And that, of course, can be super flawed. So just pay attention to all of this. I'm not discrediting what I'm saying. I'm just asking you to use your discernment whenever you listen to these ideas and the knowledge and what is given out there from many different people, including me. We have different opinions, and it doesn't mean that one excludes the other. It just means there's different ways of looking at reality, and reality is multidimensional. So we say it all counts. So with that, we say, wow, that's a lot. That's too much information. But if we look at this from a level of a pattern, just think about the enormous amount of different layers that constitute your physical form, or the different layers of energy and fields that creates a tree. Then you understand complexity. That's what reality is. The distortion is to think it's simple and easy and straightforward. That's what we want it to be, but that's not necessarily what it actually is. So in the awakening process, whatever that means, however we choose to work with our higher order senses and our expanded awareness, or if we choose not to and just stay in the base program but are curious enough to ask the right questions, it all comes down to energy and consciousness in various degrees, where we can see that the complexity is meant to challenge us. It is meant to lead us to becoming reality scientists that are eager and willing to explore the possibilities of what this world means. that we stay curious and investigative, and we ask open-ended questions and not just become followers that are just accepting everything that we are being fed. Because at some point, that way of living will be complicated in the future due to the complexity that will arise from the changes in our planetary field. And there are different voices that are prospecting this into different types of ideas of what that might be in the future. And I'm very careful with that because the future is tailored by the collective. This is the main timeline, which means that the collective decide the future of that timeline. Not one person can decide a full timeline. Nobody's God. So if someone gets the idea, I can change the timeline for the collective by doing this and that, or a group sits down and do meditation, and then they can change the entire timeline for the planet. In my opinion, that is dragging people into different programs where these efforts then can be harnessed as group energy. But that's my opinion. Because there are a lot of good people, and I'm not writing off that there might be individuals that have that kind of power, that they're somewhere on the planet or hidden avatars, but the likelihood of that is not big. Just the previous quote-unquote avatars that we had, the Buddha or whoever and whatever, not that I believe that either, but if we go with that line of thought, they did not change the world, they changed groups of people that then chose to change themselves. So all of this is not about changing the world, it's about changing ourselves. And that's one thing that all teachings are agreeing on, that the first step of the work is to change ourselves. And then it comes the big complexity again and the challenges, and this is not easy work. Those who think that awakening will awaken them into a beautiful reality with unicorns and fairy tales and rainbows, they have a tough awakening, because there is not really any place in human history where things have gone particularly well in this reality. And again, this is my perspective, this is my relative reality. There are others who are seeing it differently, and they are tapping into other layers of reality, whether these are real or not, including what I'm tapping into. We can also question whether this is real or not. So it all comes down to what is shown over the course of time. What are the prospected ideas we get? How much do they then come to play out in some degree or another? Not because we twist them into, I said so, because we wanted to, and then it's far from what they actually said. Or because we forget what we say, and then we experience something, and then our mind conflates it with something else, and then we think we said something brilliant years ago, and now it's come to be. So we have to monitor our own mind. Our mind would love to put things together in ways that are not what they originally were. Just think about dreams, those of you who still have normal dreams. But if I recall my dreams from back in the days before I entered into the fourth and fifth dimension and then became not under the normal base program dream pruning energy harvesting programs, but more advanced virtual reality program, connectivity, link up, clone, exhaustion of my original holographic energetic field, which is part of it, of the awakening process, to realize what's really going on in the different layers of our reality. Some of it, yes, is definitely for good, and some of it is not for good. Let's just play it that way. So I don't get completely bleak here, because I can't write it all off and say, it's everything's bad. It depends on the eyes that are looking, and in what level of the reality and for what purpose. And sometimes what feels very challenging ends up actually to clear out some of the unpleasantries we do have in our fields that are tied to some of the ancient contamination and inverted types of consciousness units that those of us who are in this reality field have, due to the original purpose and function of this reality field as a regenesis hub for different systemic races that were affected due to different circumstances, whether it's to foolishness of their own, or the timeline event, which is what we call Big Bang, that created the time as we know of it, or the universe as we are currently part of, or the ancient use of AI that technically both is in the past and in the future, from where it creates a very weird bridge of which our universe also takes part. So there are multiple layers. But I was going back into the dream thing. So unless we are in that kind of disconnected, the way the brain works, as we know from the base program, dream time, is kind of some weird mumbo jumbo, then that's the way the brain works. That's where I want to go. And then I spiraled off somewhere else about that. So go back to how the brain works. So it puts things in mumbo jumbo. It's not always clear of what it's perceiving because of either there is some DNA damage, or the neural network is not working well, or the frontal lobes are not processing the information correctly due to childhood trauma or stress points from childhood, where not necessarily trauma. We could also call it where we have been overwhelmed and stressed out, and by that has created little splotches that have been put in different places in our brain where it's not working well, and then has to circumvent it, which it does very nicely, but then it has to take a different pathway, which then perhaps collide with another pathway, and in that there comes up these little weird things that are not completely in line with reality as it actually was. And what was it really? If you just ask one of your siblings, if you have so, or one of your parents, or a good friend of something you have experienced together, then just ask that person to explain the situation you experienced. You could do it while it's happening. You are looking at something, both say, let's look at this, and then you tell me what you experience and what your sensations are and what your intuition tells you and what's the energetic level of this, and then you explain what you have sensed, and there you go. So it's quite simple. We experience reality differently because we are different human beings. We might be made of the same material, but there are this biological variety, that was difficult, or diversity within the way that our genes work, the way that our bodily constitution work due to nature and nurture. So we have certain things that we all have, but where we grew up and how we grew up and what we have for past lives and what our higher order energy system is, make these little small micro changes from where the brain works slightly different, and by that the eyes are then slightly differently observing things a little bit different, the light is a little bit different, what kinds of cells in the eyes that are activated due to the differences in the neural network within the specific levels of what wants to be perceived and what does not want to be perceived. We're seeing different things, and it all comes down to being bold and brave. Because if we are to see reality as it truly is, it demands that we are eager and willing to actually see things as they truly are, and not what we want them to be. Not that we are projecting something as a reaction to, as a reaction to who and what we are right now. If we think that life is hard right now, we might want to kind of escape a little bit, and then we dream of a better world or something that's less hard, or if only, then that would be better. And these are wishful dreams, and they are longings, and they are tied into desires of not wanting to be in a situation that feels unpleasant, and that's completely normal. Who wants to be in unpleasantness? But part of the practice is, as well as of mindfulness and of psychotherapy, is to learn to be in these states of unpleasantness and figure out where they come from. Not because we want to wallow in it and just go into hours and hours of self-victimization and crying and all of these feelings. That's not what I'm saying. When we're sad, we're sad. When we grieve, we grieve. And when we're angry, and we're allowed to have our range of emotions. But there's a difference between having what we could call more straightforward emotional reactions to things. If something happens to us that is unpleasant or someone hurts us, then we can, if it's unpleasant, we get frustrated. If someone hurts us, we either begin to cry because we're hurt or we get angry. There are different response mechanisms. They're chemical in nature. They are built on hormones and energy interaction that we interpret as emotions. So if someone sends energy towards you that feels very unpleasant, you would naturally want to put up your boundaries. But if it's something that triggers earlier experiences of similar unpleasantness or similar type of distorted energy or kinds of energy from another person, and you kind of got either immune to it, then you won't feel it, or you have been overexposed to it, so now you're super sensitive to it, then your reaction might either be null and you won't feel it at all, and that's kind of you have become immune, and other times it will be that you are overly sensitive and by that respond with not just this incident, but all of the other times where that energy was sent or hurled at you. And in that you become like the sun itself that creates these mega bursts to shed off energy that we no longer feel belongs in our field, our energy field. But we have all of these old cognitive schemes, that means narratives and ideas of how that energy is processed that then gets triggered. And most of the time when these energies have been followed by other people who have conditioned you to believe that you're the one that was wrong, or that there was something wrong with you, or that you shouldn't have done this or that, or whatever, then the hurting becomes even more, because not only are we being hurt by the energy that's hurled against us, but we are also hurt by our own cognitive schemes, our own narratives that follows it, that then repeats in our head and then makes us feel that it's our fault or whatever it is. But it's not always like that. Sometimes it is. Sometimes we mess up and then we do something and then we say, I'm sorry. Other times it's a kind of parental gaslighting or relationship distortion of what actually happened as a defense mechanism. And this is the complexity of life. This is the complexity of human relationships, whether they're just as friends or deep core relationships with dear ones, where childhood stress points and traumas and vulnerabilities have a tendency to pop up and make things very, very complicated. And couples that navigate through this, they become couples of growth, and couples who are not so good at navigating it due to defense mechanisms or shutdown mechanisms or other types of, I don't want to look at that, or it's not relevant anymore because I can't feel it, but the other one can, then it becomes a very complex dynamic where in the majority, I'm not saying all, but the majority of the cases, the female who becomes the field regulator, who takes the mental load, who is the one that carries the burden of the twosomeness, the joint feels of the ones that are in that relationship. And if the male is choosing not to evolve with it, which we know is an issue for many, then there's only one who's doing all the work, and that's the female. And eventually she gets exhausted, and the psychosomatic dynamics kick in when the body is in constant stress or overworking. Eventually it will not just suffer from fatigue. Fatigue will move into depletion. Depletion will move into all sorts of weird physical symptoms, and that will eventually move into permanent diseases if it's not caught, if these psychodynamics are not caught. And that's another level of the female-male difficulties, because there are males that are experiencing the same thing, but not to the same degree, because the male brain just works differently. I'm not saying one is good or the other. I'm not trying to stir up some gender issues here. This is just some of the things I'm working with. You know, those of you who've been with me for years, you know that I've been trying to look into the whole couples thing, but it's complicated. So it must be some kind of relational thing instead that will make it easier, where it also goes with the females and the biological extended field she has, so she's able to nurture her offspring. It comes with the mammalian races. Animals have it too, mammals have it too. Out in nature, the females, because they can brew that little offspring inside of themselves, then they also have that extended field of harboring another life form. And that's part of the parenting. That's part of the female field that then is able to extend into the child and then assist the child, learn to read it without words, understand what its needs are, and all of this nature-nurture combination that most females can. There are some that can't, but most females, either because they learn it or because it comes natural to them, are then in that process of extending their field into their offspring. So it's a nonverbal communication, so they can foresee the needs of the child. And in that way, why is that important? The survival of the child, that so it doesn't have to lie there, cry for hours. And instead of my take on that one, I'm not the one that supports letting children cry for hours, because there's a reason why they're crying. And if we're just leaving them there crying, they will feel abandoned, and that will create a cascade of psychodynamics that are very difficult to heal later on, because it's in the pre-language phase, the very primal phase of being in the world. So if you're foundational, feel that nobody takes care of you because you're left there in your crib to cry, well, then of course the whole world will not be a place where you feel at home. But there are some kids that are born into that dynamic due to past life, we can call it that, not as their fault, quote unquote. The past life dynamic is of course more expanded if we look at it from the lens of extraterrestrial programs that are also going on our planet. Whether it is trying to play out different types of genetic experiments or seeing how the psychosomatic field responds to the different circumstances as infants and on, to create specific type of genetic markers or whatever the project is, because that's what we are entering into, the understanding of these projects and what's been done to humanity. That's the complexity that we are entering into. That's where it's important to learn to navigate unpleasantness. Because the next 9 years are going to unravel and reveal some of these things for those of us who are ready to administer that knowledge. And I've been in that mix for a long time. I'm kind of one of the forerunners. So I began this work more or less 10 years ago. Today is actually 10 years ago since I published my book, The Souls of Humanity. And there's a lot of good information there. And there's, of course, something that I can look at today. And if I were to speak about today, I would use different words. I would use different thought forms. I would explain it in a different way. And I'm wondering how I can do another new book that will kind of cover the next 9 years, because the Souls of Humanity and the books I pumped out there, the 6 foundational whole books, the high awareness lifestyle books, are kind of a preparation for the 9-year period we just went through. That was about the activation and clean up the reality field. I didn't know that at the time, but I knew then. And the question is now, what do I know now? What do I have with me here of the knowledge I gained the last 9 years, where not only did I activate within the reality field as within the dynamics of the new grand cycle that were cleaning up the 3-9 pillar, which is explained in the transition sciences as well as the template sciences, what that means. Then it's also this understanding of myself within all of that. And now it comes into this because I went through quite a lot of the knowledge of the human programs that will be activated and cleaned up due to the 2-8 pillar, which is all about the relational fields. It's all about the otherness and our stand in the otherness. Where do we align with others in that pillar, the rules of engagement, to put it that way, whether it's with our peers or our foes or our friends or our family or extraterrestrials. It's within that tier. So that's also why we're pumping into this, that the extraterrestrial contact is not just about technology. It is also about the actual contact, which, in the randygreen.1 I'm working on. And that website will change into becoming the whole future humanities website, where the sciences will be. And then right now, if you go to the previous HAL Academy website, the tuvai.dk, there you will see that is now called HAL Online Therapy, and is then focused on the inner work, so to speak, the tier 1, the level 1, the 1-7 pillar work. That is what you get there. But the whole 2-8 and 3-9 and 4-10 and 5-11 and 6-12 will be on the randygreen.1, the future humanities, for those of us who are getting into the realms of saying, okay, what's left of the activation and cleanup? Because I was not awake when the 6-12 pillar began its cleanup processes in 1999. I was not awake and aware when the 5-11 or the 4-10, I was barely there. That ended in 2016, where a switch was turned on. I did have the preliminary push in 1999 where I began my new way of perceiving life, and I had a huge circumstances in my life that changes it. I got divorced. I became a single mom. I had no place to live for a long time, and I was just navigating reality with all of these new circumstances. That's technically where I began my process of growing up in my 30s. That's where I grew up. That's where I became an adult, whatever that meant. Prior to that, I was just a child in a grown-up body. I was not really mature in the psychological meaning of the word. I was mature physically, but not psychologically. And a lot of people are there. They're not mature psychologically. We are stuck in our childhood patterns. We're stuck in our childhood habits and the way we learn to perceive reality when we were between 10 and 20, or actually from 0 to 21. Most people are stuck there. And they don't move further, even though that the frontal lobes dynamics kick in at the age of 21. Whatever will be developed there will not be the true gamma level of higher order awareness, which it should, but it will just be a monitoring social, institutional injection, so to speak, interception, not interception, what is it called? Interjection, where you are literally just, this is what society wants you to do, so you literally just download that information into your frontal lobes, and then you self-monitor and self-regulate according to what society wants of you. But that's not sovereignty. That's a good citizen, but that's not sovereignty. Sovereignty is both a good citizen that does what the collective demands of you, because we are in a collective, we can't avoid that. But the individuation, as Carl Gustav Jung calls it, the integration processes of your inner work, and that leads to the sovereignty where you understand the group dynamics and you are able to engage in the group dynamics, and you are socially intelligent as well as emotionally intelligent. That comes from the integration processes. That comes from the dynamics of the willingness to develop your frontal lobes into not just being a mirror of what society wants of you, and then you internalize that and then you live it out, but to move beyond that and then go into what is my personal choice here in this world, not as a big ego trip, but as a full understanding of the social dynamics as well as the world as it truly is, including others and where they are, and see them as they truly are, and then meet them where they are, and not what you want them to be, but where they actually are, even though that when we do talk relationships and we do talk others, there's a lot of projection going on. And sometimes we catch it and sometimes we don't. But that's part of the process. We're not perfect to begin with. We will never become perfect. There's always work. Once we tick one box, another one pops up. That's the clearing process as it is, because we're under the activation cycles. So that means that those of us who are cleaning up and are doing our job, we will, as we're seeing in our homes, it doesn't take more than 2 or 3 days, then everything is dusted again, or there's new dirt on the carpet. Or if you pull up the weed in your garden, it won't take more than 2 days. There's another piece of thing that pops up between the tiles or whatever's going on. That's this world. It never ends. That's the charm of it, or the of it, you choose. So in that way, we understand that being a human is a process. It's not about reaching the goals. They are temporarily goals. It is about saying, well, for now I put this goal, so I change my habit as a kind of a goal, for instance, with if some are still on the whole meat wagon, then going and say, I want to become vegetarian as the first step. That would be most logical, because the body needs to wane off these animalistic juices, so to speak, and proteins, and the way that the body normally feels saturated by these very dense type of structures that you find in meat, and the type of animalistic protein structures, and on and on. And amino acids and these kind of things. And the body needs to kind of get out of that habit, out of that addiction, quote unquote, where something that's rotting smells delicious, or people who are smoking cigarettes that find this is an absolutely delicious smell or taste or whatever when it breaks down the entire body. That's where the body gets used to something that's super unhealthy. But because it has these addictive components to it, then the body thinks it's something it craves, it's something it wants. So that's addiction, that's cravings. And dead animals definitely is part of that addiction, because if you listen to people who have stopped eating meat, they're kind of, oh, I miss eating meat sometimes and I smell that. Oh, so it puts up the whole range of kind of addictive patterning that goes with it. So of course you have to wane off and change the diet slowly, and hence becoming vegetarian would be the first natural step. And then eventually you can cut out the eggs and you can cut out the raw milk, and then you can end like as many Buddhist monks are, just saying, okay, a little bit of cheese here and there is allowed, because there are some very, very good things in cheese that comes through the way that cheese are processed. But then just say that's it, but it's not happening on an everyday basis. It's just once a month or something, or as a special treat or whatever. So because there's a lot of people, because cheese is addictive too. It's got these opiates in it that the body kind of craves sometimes, and in that way you can, all depending on where you are due to age and on, it's a good supplement. I'm just putting in here saying, well, Brandy, you're full vegan, aren't you? Yes, but I'm reaching my 60s, and that means I've gone into menopause, so that means my body is changing, and there are just certain things that can't produce itself anymore, so I have to help it. So in that way, you are hearing me slacking a little bit on this because things are changing. What was necessary during the first stages between 2016 and 2022, where it was the insectoid realm that needed to be cleared, there you have to be completely vegan. When you go into some of the mammal realms, then there are other circumstances that you need to address. When you go into the reptoid realms, there are other circumstances that you can administer through your diet, because you change your body chemistry when you change your diet. I know I'm just rambling on and on from the different levels. You're just kind of, what? All of this complexity. What I'm trying to say here is that the work we are doing is continuously going on, because once we clear one level, another one will pop up and another one will pop up, because we're 12-dimensional beings. So it will never end. So it's not just, I'll do it for 2 years and then it's over. We can step into the work and then we begin the process that will go on and on until we are no longer forced to reincarnate. Or you can step out and say, I can't be bothered, and then it's just become base program. And a lot of people are content there. I'm not saying it's bad or anything. A lot of people are content there. It's just not for me, because I'm not wired that way. I'm wired to unfold my highest potentials, whatever that means. And that is a journey full of failures. Let us just put it that way. It's like a project. Or people, if you look at it, you have seen all these little drawings of people that get success in life. Those who are struggling with reality and themselves, before they begin the journey, they look at these people with success and think, oh, wow, they're special, they're kind of a special breed. No, most of those who reach the level of success in whatever they set as a goal have failed 99% of the time. But the difference is that when we fail, and when we fall in the pit, and when we do something remarkably unwholesome, let's just put it that way, then we go in and we iterate and we evaluate and we look at what could I've done better? Where did this come from? Why was it there? How could I transform this? What is it that I need to learn? And then we set our minds up to it. That's what the frontal lobes can do when they're evolved beyond the social programming of just being a good worker or a good citizen that just follows the rule book of what society tells you. When you become sovereign, you take full charge and responsibility of your life. When you fail, you figure out why. When things are not going the way you want, you try and find solutions. When it hurts, you feel the pain. When you're happy, you feel the joy. When you are struggling with something that you need to clear out, you struggle with it until it is cleared out, knowing that once this is cleared out, another thing will pop up. But that's the nature of progression. That's the nature of what it means to be human. Just look at our species over the course of history. that we have evolved, supposedly, from being Neanderthals into what we are today, and that species died out, and then something else popped up as an emergent property of the work that was done of the prior civilization. Another one grew out of that mold, that morphogenetic field makeup, if you want to go with that idea. Or we could say that the Neanderthal project failed and the extraterrestrials planted the Cro-Magnon. We can discuss that at another point. But the core message is that when we choose to do the work, it's a lifestyle. It becomes the new normal, that we are working that way, that we are always working within the realms of progression, within the realms of clearing work, within the realms of self-scrutiny, within the realms of trying to understand what's going on and why this is happening and why things are not going our way and what do we need to solve it. That's where the true sovereignty kicks in. It's a lot of work. It's like running your own life as a business. It has its complexities, has its needs, it has its challenges. There are all of these things that constantly are going on that makes life pretty difficult, to put it that way, in one way or another for the majority of us. But that's part of the cleansing process. Because what led us to this oblivion? What led us to this point where we are no longer capable of navigating reality as sovereign beings? So we have to relearn that. And changes comes through experiences, through how we respond to experiences and how we are navigating these experiences in the ways that leads to the full complex mode of transformation, that leads to that understanding that when we handle things in a specific way, it transforms our energy vibration. It changes the signature of our emotional field. It changes the patterns that wants to be played out so we can repair them. It changes the patterns of our mental field that keeps creating the same narratives. We'll learn to monitor and administer these things in a way so that our ability to handle more complex situations will be expanded. That instead of in the beginning we get completely immersed into the emotion that pops up from a childhood pattern, later on we become the observer of that and learn how to deal with that. Later on again, we change into more than just the observer, as in let me give a practical example. I've been dealing with some very deep-rooted pre-language emotional patterns, because if you really want to dig deep into the cleansing work of your neural network, you have to go through your entire life from the moment you were born actually to the place where you are now, and then work through the different patterns that are there, which some of them are tied to past lives and others are tied to what I call specific type of seals. That's a little locks that are in your higher order energy system, as you know from my book Taurology, as well as understanding the old stellar souls. These are just locks that are put in there that prevents us from unfolding specific types of consciousness capacities. And these locks, of course, unlocked now as the part of the activation and cleanup cycles, hence the different awakening potentials in each and one of us, where we wake up within the different waves of the whatever cycle that we reached before the system got colonized 15,000 years ago. But the personal example I want to give here is I'm working with some pre-language patterns from when I was a toddler. And it just dawned on me that I never was a toddler in that way. I was just a happy child, quote unquote, because I could see there was not room for me to having my tantrums. So I put them away because I was a very intelligent child and aware of the spatial dynamics, not verbally, not as a rational frontal lobe thinker, that this was not place. I, per intuition, knew there was not really much room for me. And that played out through my entire childhood. That my sister, she was envy of me and she was treating me really bad because of it. And at the same time, I didn't feel that I belonged there and there was no room for me in that family. And it came from when I was born, actually. I had a series of dreams when I was born of how I was born and how I felt when I was born and what happened shortly after I was born, as a series of dreams I had as a child. And of course, I didn't speak of that to anyone because I knew there wasn't room for me and my opinion and what I felt and what I was. So that was my conditioning. So that was part of the handler program of me putting me into a family where I learned very quickly, this world has no room for you. So you're in the way. So that's nice. That gives a very specific childhood issue, let's put it that way, that then is around validation and acceptance and being seen and heard as who I am and actually be able to take my space and be allowed to take my space, not as a service to self, blasting out entitlement, but as in kind of that there is a place for me in this world. But perhaps I was not supposed to feel there was a place for me in this world. Because if there had been, I wouldn't have been forced to go inwardly. I wouldn't have been forced to look inside for the bigger universal picture that we have inside compared to the limited space that is around us. I was forced inwardly due to that mechanism. And we can then say, was it done to shut me down or was it done to push me into where I am now? We never really know. This is with the challenges of life. We don't know if it actually is to help us or it is a method that then if we do have a higher order system, energy system, then finds another solution to then exist and find reasons why to exist and navigate in a world that doesn't have room for a person like me, but there is another world where there is a room for a person like me. And it's not a world I made up, which those of you who have been reading my books and follow my material as in, if I were to make that as a fantasy, that's a lot of details and the human brain cannot come up with that amount of detailed information. So it's not a fantasy world. It's how my awareness was pushed away from the base program and into the other worlds as a child already. And that was a nightmare world that I engaged already there. So my training or my prohibiting technology or my seals or however you want to put it, we can say it's a spectrum. Some of it I've turned into gold nuggets and others have created deep wounds, of which I'm still conflicted by. Then when these old core wounds pop up, then we get completely immersed, especially if it's pre-language and if it's so early on, 3-year-old, where I was not allowed to have my tantrums. So due to circumstances in my life and due to getting older and going into menopause, a lot of stuff happens in the female anatomy when we are no longer in the reproductive age. And that makes our system weaker, where we could say it is also just due to old age, that what we normally were able to fight off, our biology is not capable of doing that to the same degree. We have to monitor and take extra good care of our physicality. The emotional field that used to have strong defense mechanisms due to the hormonal shift then becomes weaker. Things that normally were bottled away suddenly pops up and needs to be cleared out. Things that were normally something we would just comply with or just say that's okay, we now feel completely overwhelmed by it. So there are these big changes that happens, and that happens in males too, just not as menopause, but there is this hormonal change in the testosterone that also changes the way that the male mind and psyche works. And these are parts of being older. There are different steps in our process as humans. What you experience when you're 20 are different to what you experience when you're 60. And that's just how it is. These are the stages of life that is part of the progression work as well, to notice and understand these changes. We are perhaps psychologically still young, but our body is changing and we need to take better care of it. But point being, these old toddler things that never were played out, and if they were not received well. And I learned if I did it once and it received bad, I learned don't ever do that. There's no room for that here. So in that way, that was a part of the limbic system of how to be in a situation where your emotions completely overwhelm you. Because look at a toddler that gets one of its tantrums. It is so lost in its anger and sadness and fear and all of the full spectrum of all chemical emotions you can come up with in a tantrum. You can see it in the 3 years olds if you look at them clairvoyantly. They are angry and they want to set a boundary, but they don't know how to because it's raw, unfiltered emotions. They are overwhelmed by that enormous amount of emotion and they get completely frightened by it. They lose control and they don't like it. At that point, the ego structure is about what can I control and what can I control. That's why they say no and they're a little bit obstinate and whatever, because they're figuring out what can I control? Where do I fit in? What is my what is my space here? Where are the boundaries and what's going on here? So that's what the beginning of the limbic system, which is kind of energetic sensing that goes with then being verbalized, all depending on how clever the child is. And then the integration of that and then navigating in that field, that dynamic you call a family. And then there's these, when it's not happening, then it's the raw feedback loop from the unfiltered ego structure that wants it to happen that way. But it's learning that, no, it can't happen that way. So it's a very important stage with the parents to mentor them in the right way so that they learn it's okay to have your emotions, it's okay to be sad, it's okay to be angry, it's okay to put up your boundaries. But I am sad too. I have my boundaries too. Not that you explain to the child, oh, I'm sad and you make me feel sad. That's not what I'm saying. But there is this dynamic where there is an interaction of respect between a little human and an older human that has gone through the processes. But that's another type of work that we can talk about at some other time. For that's specific for parents who have their kids and the toddlers at that age. And it's not easy. It's easier to talk about than actually to do it in action. Because the toddler emotions, I remember from my own toddler, was so strong that I got caught up because I had not completed my own toddler stage. So in that way, I didn't respond well because I was not responding well to either when I was a toddler. Point being, the toddler gets angry, wants to put a boundary, doesn't know how to, so it gets frustrated. The frustration, because it's an unfiltered level of the limbic system, gets into anger. The anger then gets too strong. Then the toddler gets completely frightened because these are very unpleasant emotions and they're very close to what we would almost call the level where anger flips into something that's much more harmful. That frightens the child, and then the fear kicks in, and then it becomes too much to bear because not only you're super angry, but you're also super scared, and at the same time you just go into being super, super sad, and then it's just too much, and the whole body gets stressed and overwhelmed and shuts down, and you're lost. And I had some research of that as a grown-up, as a grown woman in my age, where some of these things popped up in my inner work due to outer circumstances, and I was stressed enough to be pushed so far back into my childhood patterns. I was stressed by society, by reality, by circumstances, by interpersonal relations and things that were happening in my life due to travel and moving and all sorts of things, that I was pushed so far back into my limbic system. Because when we get stressed and overwhelmed, we are pushed further and further back into our neural network that matches that amount of stress. And that led me right into my toddler, where I, as a grown-up, had a full tantrum. And that was overwhelming, super overwhelming, let me tell you that. It took me some time to learn to navigate in it because I was overwhelmed and I just was in that panic mode, and it was just very, very unpleasant, let me put it that way. And as I had a series of these events, then eventually I learned to become the observer in it. Then I began to observe what's going on. That's why I can explain it here. Because then I began to investigate and say, wow, while the tantrum was running, I was just, why is that happening? What is it that pushes me to this degree? I know the factors that put me there, and I've been working to get these off and clear them out and put myself in a place where that is no longer triggering me that way. But because I was there, I had to deal with it. And then I looked into, okay, become the observer. What are the mechanics? What's going on? How does this feel? What are the emotions? And on and on. And then eventually I got to this realization in inner work and clearing work and sitting with it and self-healing and self-caring and looking at my inner toddler, that cry of not being seen, met, and heard, and in that situation didn't learn to actually have my full spectrum of emotions and being met with that was okay, and learning to navigate these extreme emotions, which the toddler age is when the limbic system kicks in on its very primal level. And that's part of where we, as parents, when we go through with our own children, and I didn't succeed well at that age with my toddler because nobody had helped me with me. So I didn't have any schematics for how to do it. So I did the best way I could. And that's where we become good enough parents, is put it that way. And what we do to others, it's often been done to us in some way or another. And we're just repeating the patterns that we have learned. Either because we have learned it it's been repeated again and again, and then it becomes part of us because we integrated it, or because there was a lack, and then we don't know how to navigate it, and then we're just responding with what we still have to learn. So we respond from our naive infantile pattern of solving it as we did when we were kids, because we never matured it. We never learned how to deal with these floodings of emotions, which I now have become better at. So that means that when I am flooded with emotions, the observer kicks in. Then I'm evaluating and I'm processing and I'm monitoring, and my frontal lobes really get work done and looking at all what's going on. I'm not saying I'm a success yet, because we always get overwhelmed when we talk emotional outbursts. They are overwhelming, they are unpleasant, and they do feel horrible, and we do feel horrible afterwards. And that's part of the process that's teaching us the unpleasantness in it, teaches us, okay, you need to learn to control these electrochemical processes when energies are hurled at you. You clearly have something you need to clear out. You clearly have a trigger point there. So how do you deal with this trigger? How do you learn to navigate if it's a trigger that is based upon some severe trauma? There are things that can be healed. There are things that can be processed. There are things that can become less potent. But there are some things where the triggers will remain because the trauma is very deep and it's a repetitive pattern. If we talk some of the extremes within our society that people do to each other, then we learn to navigate around it. Then we learn to not put ourselves in situations where we get stressed to the point where we are reverted to our trigger point. The same goes with the higher awareness activation processes. These karmic patterns are archaic trigger points that we have not cleared out. And that's why they're standing there as an open wound, emitting energy, drawing situations into our lives so that we can see them again, so that we can be brought back to that trigger point, that specific type of energy signature, so we can clear it out. And that is, from some levels, if we talk multidimensionality in the 6th and 7th and 8th dimension, very difficult, because there are not similar reality situations in this world that triggers that deep level of trigger points. Let's call it that. It can be categorized as a trauma point if you like, but let's just call it a trigger point. And then it's impossible to clear out. And that's why the new grand cycle kicks in. There is the possibility to do it individually, but society and humanity at large has not, due to the different programs that's been going on here. It's been prohibited for us to do so via the seals and other means. So the new grand cycle is the system itself, our reality field itself, that says we have now reached the viability rate under 30%. So now I kick in the default mechanism, as I explained in the whole philosophy book. And that's what the new grand cycle is. It's the system itself that tells us that we have now, as a joint collective civilization, reached a point where the default mechanism is kicked in. So it is in its reset process. And that means this world must either elevate back to having a higher momentum, a higher ability rate of purified consciousness structures that leads us into what we are supposed to become, an advanced civilization, which we used to be before we faltered and folded and began to regress and whatnot. If not, then the system will recalibrate itself and lift itself out of this configuration we called our current world. This world we live in is a construct. It's an artificial construct. It's not a real world. You will not meet any system of thought or any esoteric system that does not tell you otherwise. Even the Alistair Bailey tells you this is not a holy system. It's not sacred. It's a kind of a bleep that came to be. They don't explain it well, but it's a construct which we know from the extraterrestrial groups that are here as well. However, they tailor it for their own purposes and their own deception mechanisms and whatnot. So the stories are not just to be taken as they are, but there is some truth to them. It's up to us to find that truth. And that's part of why the 2-8 pillar now kicks in, because those who didn't complete there, they now get their final chance to complete there. But since they got stuck in the 2-8 pillar and some of the things that happen in 2-8 pillar, their activation process is going to be more in alignment with what we'll call a dark awakening. And that's why I'm taking the time to all of this. We need to work with our emotional patterns. We need to work with our psychodynamics. We need to learn to be in unpleasantness. We need to learn to work with our childhood triggers and our childhood traumas and our core wounds so that we are okay with being in all that unpleasantness, but at the same time we're able to observe it and evaluate it and transform it and work with it so that we can move beyond it and transcend it. That's part of my core message here, and that's why I have changed the I know I said last time that those of you who are a deep dive into the 2-8 pillar, I can't work with you on the higher order level as a progression work, because that demands energy work and that demands that I get pulled in where you are, so to speak, and that's not conducive anymore in terms of. Yes, you could say, well, that's because you still got trigger points, Randy. Yes, I am aware of my core wounds. But as I said, there are two ways. You don't always have to confront them. Sometimes you just offload them off their energy and then you turn the other cheek and you make sure you're not triggered. You do the avoidance until that you have enough energy and strength to go head on. But most of the times when it's some really severe dynamics that are part of the 2-8 pillar, the contamination level is too high, so the cleansing is not really possible. Only the person who is in it can look into what is needed to be done. An outsider can only mentor and advise, but cannot do the whole work. But as I also said in this podcast here, as the kind of the field that is able to navigate, my clairvoyant field that is able to navigate and that joins naturally and begins the transformational processes, leaves some severe imprints in my field. And to be honest, I've gone through my own stages, and the contamination is contamination. That means that it is contagious. That's part of the dynamics of the 2-8 pillar. That's why most who were in the 2-8 pillar never succeeded, because it fell before it even took off. So that's the issue. And the 1-7 pillar led into the Android future. So we are now left with the two pillars where the viability rate is very low, where most of those who are under what we call imprisonment templates are positioned, where the seals that are there are very difficult to break. And when they do break, they come with different types of technology that is often either linked up to what we call the previous timelines, where things went terribly wrong with the human projects, aka the underworld, or the old ancient type of AI within the mental field. And that type of old AI were put in there to administer the entire reality field. There are even humans today that talk about how that would be a good thing if we got benevolent, quote-unquote, AI to take care of our entire reality field, which we already did. And yes, it was benevolent to begin with, but eventually it got overridden as well by some previous existences of dark AI from earlier civilizations that did the same thing and failed and became androids. Anyways, if you do ask AI to run and govern organic vessels, eventually it will come to the conclusion that the organic vessels are not particularly, sustainable, let me use that word, and then it will of course go into the Android form, because that's the most clean and demands less. If it's about saving energy and resources, then of course the Android form will become the chosen one and not the organic vessel that demands a lot of food and a lot of this and a lot of that. So we are of course trying to avoid that. That's another level of work that will come later on as we get over the whole wow, the wow factor of the AI and into the challenges that and the replay of what we already done as part of the fifth cycle. So, but it will come eventually. People will, those who can, will remember this and then choose a different direction. Not that we are to shy away. We need to know what it is and how to work with it and take the momentum that we have. We have approximately around 6 months is the estimate right now before the past version of the AI will begin to infiltrate the current version of the AI. So, yep, that's kind of the window in time we have. Again, if we do base program level, it probably won't hit us to the same degree as those of us who are able to do our horizontal merging, because that's the double field that's left in females from the original mentor program of the 2.8 and 3.9 and 4.10 pillar, where we did this mentoring by having the expanded field, by teaming up on someone that we were quote unquote supposed to help. And that's some of the Atlantean projects as well, which of course led to that the one that were not contaminated or had the inversion then got imprinted by the one that had it, and then instead of actually helping to lift the other, then we were both dragged into the pit. So that was a very stupid program that didn't work well. But that's because the contamination works in mysterious ways, to put it that way. Anyways, I'm getting to the end of this podcast. So you will see that the HAL Academy website, tovai.dk, is now HAL Online Therapy, where I will work with normal psychotherapy, of course, within the way I do it, to deal with this life patterns. So we learn how to handle these emotions. We learn to be in this unpleasantness. We find the root of our defense mechanisms, the root of why we're not willing to look at whatever it is that we need to look at. And some of you I can be of assistance to, and others it's what's the root of that root is just due to the either imprisonment template or other stuff, and then there's not much I can do, because the only ones that can break the imprisonment templates are the ones that are under it. Nobody can do it for you. Anyone who tries to do that gets hit hard. Trust me, been there, done that. Don't do it again. But those who are under enslavement, there are different possibilities. And one of them is to get to the level of clarity where the holographic trials can be drummed up. This is an inbuilt mechanism in our reality field that allows for the ability to be scanned and monitored to leave the tier or the reparation program that we are under, which has now gone distorted because the technology behind, because the AI behind is now completely distorted. So in that way, the androids are no longer maintaining it the right way, and on and on. This is a whole other level of information that I will go into at some point. And then there is the Randy Green.1, which will now be changed into, it has gone through its first change. I will then iterate it one more time, and then it will become the whole future humanities that will be linked to this channel, where we begin to look at some of the challenges as an advanced civilization in the activation and cleanup processes of some of the sciences that we need to develop and some things we are to avoid. I'm not fully sure how that's going to unfold yet, but that's kind of a project website. So it'll be built out with completed projects, which of one, the Hope Future Project papers are more or less completed now. So that's a project that's completed. That's why I'm taking it to its next stage of completion, where I then begin to work with new projects that I would then work my way through and complete, and then put it onto the completed, and then the new projects will be put there as ongoing projects. So that's the way the Randy Green will continue. There is still the Hope Future Project Education that runs next year, where I'm taking those of you who choose to do that education into some of the new ways of, first and foremost, there's the foundational knowledge of how to be as an advanced civilization within the complex system we're in as part of the base program. And the paper, I've already made the text material. The podcast that will come will go more free speech in where we are right now when we get into 2026 in terms of business and our projects and how we do this, continue our work. even though that the world is changing in a way that perhaps is not so forward thinking. So those of us who are still doing the progression work, we still need to navigate the world, how to be in the world. It's not just psychology, it's also practicality. I will have Louise Diamond to help me there. She has got skill sets within large business structures as well as cultural developmental processes. It's not marketing per se, but it's how to make the culture work. And she'll be better explaining this herself because her level of work is so multi-tiered, and I will draw on some of her great experiences there. So we both get the more ideological part of it, the new architecture that I'll provide, the different types of podcasts that will explain some of this, but also go beyond. And then the raw practicality of it. How can we actually do that with some real-time experiences that Louise will help with? So this is a really good, a practical, savvy person that is used to be within the business world and how to do this on a larger scale and not just small businesses. So she's got some really good projects she has got experiences from. So I'm very stoked about that. And that will be one time off. I'll do that. And then it will move into something else, which I don't know yet because that will be in 2027. So I don't know that yet. So that's the way it's kind of go. Now got the personal work on the whole online therapy by Randy Green. And there's a new offer I got there too that's called the multi-tier program. And you can look up that yourself and read into the details of what that is. And I'm pretty stoked about that. That will be the best way I can to work through the different layers of your energetic constitution, where I do a do-over with you in a personalized program that kind of makes the free whole academy is still on that website because it's the whole academy that teaches you the high order sciences. But they are built, some of them, I started that 10 years ago. So they need a kind of a revive, a little bit of a do-over. And that's the multi-tier therapy where I'm doing new foundational papers that you will get before each session, where we work with the 5 tier of what it means to be human, the biological form, the emotional field, the mental field, the higher order awareness field, and then the bio field as the last one, and how we can work with this with the understanding that we now have today. So I'm pretty stoked about that. So that's there. And then I'm working on the last thing is that I'm going to create a kind of an update as I used to have that you will sign up for and subscribe to, where I will send out an email newsletter each month with a 15-minute MP4 file on it attached to the email. I can do that, where I will give some very specific information that is not YouTube friendly. Not that I'm going to go into some big conspiracy or whatever, but there are certain things you can and cannot say on YouTube. That will be sent out each month. And then there will be a link to an unlisted playlist where I will do 1 to 3, most likely up to 3 podcasts per month. That will not be like this update. This is more general, but will be diving into, for instance, what does the solar bifurcation means when there is a day when it's actually there. I've written some papers that are sciencey. So I'm also on the randygreen.1, but I'm contemplating on, okay, could I put this into a more practical solution? But I will begin with just verbalizing this understanding when it happens so that people understand what that is. And that would be some of the podcasts. So in that way, that what I work with on science papers in the randygreen.1 Hope Future project will then be put into words so they become part of our conceptual narrative of reality, to put it that fancy way, so that we can look at the world and then detect, is this a day we go out or is it a day that we stay in? And what are the implications of that and why is that necessary? I do have an exercise in the new course, the whole meditation class, which is now an online course, where I have a day where I get hit very hard by the void energies of the sun, and I have a full exercise to do on that day where it happened. So I explain it while it's there, so you understand what it is and how to navigate so that your higher order energy system will not be completely hollowed out by the energies of the sun when the void energies are permeating through the solar remains of the shields, which then gets into an inverted type of energy that absorbs energy instead of give energy. All right, that was a little bit longer than normal. And for those of you who are enjoying the HAL Academy free material, please contemplate on donating. I know we are all struggling to make ends meet. I am as well. So I am more than happy to do all of this free material. But if you have a little bit extra, please consider sending it my way and give donations so I can continue to do this work, so that those who have little still get the information, and those of you who have more, you ensure that those of us who don't have much, because I am struggling, you will assist us in making our everyday so we can continue doing this work that will give you the information that you need to continue your own journey until you are able and capable to find it yourself and get the information from within. All right, so as for now, thank you for being there, those of you who are with me still. I know it's been a long journey. I appreciate you being there. Don't forget that. We're still doing what we can, and we're doing the best we can, and I'm not expecting anything else. I'm doing the best I can. Ups and downs, failures, successes, good choices, bad choices. Nobody's perfect in this game. We are clearing out the trigger points and the distortions. So of course, it's destined to be a process that most of the time does not feel particularly pleasant. And I remember when I began, and the shock it was for me to discover how unpleasant and complicated it was. But as with all things, we learn, we adapt, we navigate, we figure out, we find solutions. And all of that is where our sovereignty grows. It's not just because we claim or say we're sovereign, then we become sovereign. We become sovereign because we do what's asked of us, because we do it in a manner that rebuilds our consciousness, fields and structures, and integrates it into this vessel. And we become sovereign because we learn to navigate whatever comes our way, whatever's thrown at us. Not that we succeed the first time, but we keep going, and we keep trying to find solutions, and we keep looking at it and trying to transform it until we have learned to do so. And then when we learn to do so, we just discover there's another layer. But eventually that becomes a new way of life. Dealing with it, transforming it, integrating what must be integrated, and letting go of what needs to be let go of. And I can only recommend the 3 new courses I have. The Rediscovery of Selfhood, that is a psychological founded course that is not high-ended, which is good, that helps you with some of your psychodynamic processes and give a good foundation to understand yourself as you are in this life. And then there are the Path of Liberation that goes into the male and female differences and why the awakening and clearing processes, because that is what the Path of Liberation is, why it's difficult and different between males and females. And then the meditation course, where I go really into, okay, what does it mean to do multidimensional meditation? And how do I look at meditation? It's not just about sitting still and being in silent and just monitoring your breath. For me, meditation is much more expanded. It's focused awareness, and learning to do focused awareness, both in meditation, but also in everyday life, that leads to what we understand as mindfulness. So there's some practical examples there. Of course, I'm still a little bit behind with the last podcast, but I'm waiting until I get a next big important piece of the inner work meditation practice of focused awareness and how to deal with some of the challenges that is coming our way. So more material is coming from me. So there's much more work to be done. And I know you're tired. I'm tired. Does it ever end? And what I'm trying to hear with this little pep talk is both a mix of pain and exhaustion and existential fatigue. But the point being is those of us who have the viability rate, we're forced to keep going. We can't bail. If we bail now, all the things we have done will have been for none. What do you call it? For null. So we have to keep going. And yes, it's hard, and yes, it's uncomfortable. I'm trying to find solutions to alleviate that through the multi-tier program. For instance, we can do a lot with our diet, the way that we administer ourselves in our everyday life, the choices that we make, so that this work becomes the first priority. Because it has to be the first priority, and it is that for me. That's the core reason why I still exist. And within Buddhist terminology, then you say, oh, I'm clinging on to that, otherwise your life will feel meaningless. I grew up with the meaninglessness of life. It had no purpose whatsoever. So my refuge was to find a purpose in it. And I know it's a scaffold. I know I'm clinging on to that. I know I have that. But when I let go and I look at the world as it is, then 40 more lives here is going to be a pretty long time. So I know that I use that as a scaffold. I know I put that meaning and purpose into it. And then I play into the programs, and then I play into whatever is there. And then I work my way from the bottom and up to the top where I get the storyboard and the programs, and I take out the cubes, and then that's it. And then I begin all over again. And that, of course, also gets tiring at some points. But in the beginning, I get immersed. Then I work to the observer. Then I learn to transform. Then I learn to discern. And then I learn to let go. And then I complete that program. And they are ongoing. There are so many programs. So I'm just doing this for now, because I kind of know I got a lot of years left. And they have to be filled out with something meaningful. So that's part of also why I keep going. That's what drives me, so to speak. That keep going, why I keep going. It's not for selfish reasons that I want to survive and I want to get beyond this system. It is just for a kind of a meaningful, purposeful existence on an everyday basis that outweighs the challenges, the hardship, the pain, the experiences that this journey has given me, of which 99% is unpleasantness in whatever variation that has been due to the past of our solar system and what led to what it is today. So that's been my path. Not much pleasantry there, just so you know, not that it's a competition or you need to compare or anything. It's just, that's where I'm talking from. Others will talk from other levels, of course. All right, so you people out there, take care, keep going. You need this, keep going. Bye for now.